Welcome to the second episode of Nature Cures podcast. My name is Dr. Erica Steele. I am a board certified naturopathic doctor. I hold 6 degrees in my field. They're all in the natural healthcare space. I've been in practice for over 20 years and I've treated over 40,000 patients, all in general family practice. So, welcome. If you've listened to episode 1, or if you're just now finding me, please go back and check out episode 1. We really talk about kind of the foundations of naturopathy, my mission with this podcast, but also just in general with the world and populating the world with hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of naturopaths running around that protect nature cure. So if you want to learn about the history and how Nature Cure kind of came to be, especially in the States, feel free to watch that episode. So this episode, we're going to talk about really mapping out all of the modalities, because that's kind of a sexy topic. People love to talk about the modalities. The sciences, they're like, sometimes people are, they really kind of nerd out on that stuff. And I will definitely do an episode about that because I love science. However, in this episode, we're going to talk about some of the modalities and just how and what and when and why we use certain things so that you have a deeper understanding of that. So first off, let's talk about what is a modality. So imagine modality is more of like your toolkit. You have a giant bag, and as you're in school, you're learning all of these things. And so quick plug. So I was on the advisory board for some time for Everglades University. So big shout out to Everglades in Boca Raton. And I have 2 degrees from them. I have a bachelor's in alternative medicine as well as a master's in public health with a concentration in culinary alternative medicine. So if you need an undergrad degree or you're looking to go into public health care policy, I definitely encourage you to check their school out. Love it. The reason I bring them up is that their bachelor's program I just loved it. And here's why. Even though I already had a bachelor's at the time, it was more of an adjunct bachelor's degree. I loved it because it was a real splattering of all of the different modalities, not just in naturopathy, but in natural healthcare. So, Ayurveda and acupuncture and naturopathy and chiropractic. And it really went into all of those different modalities, right? So I'm going to just kind of spend a couple moments kind of talking about those modalities and then focus on the modalities that are really under naturopathy. So Ayurveda comes out of India, predates our Western medicine by 10,000 plus years, and it operates off of a system of the doshas. And so, there's like Pitta and Kapha and, all of these things. And so the person kind of goes through some consultation, and then they are assessed in terms of what their dosha is, and then recommendations are given based off of that particular dosha. I'm not going to butcher it. That class was a struggle for me because I was so Western trained already. And so, but there are some amazing Ayurvedic practitioners out there who have explored it, and they're good in it, and they're amazing at it, and they do it, and it works, and all the things. And so, and you see a lot of that in the yoga community as well. They do a lot of Ayurvedic practices, especially with the food and nutrition and stuff like that. There are some conflicting things to Western approach in functional medicine. So that's when my brain was like, in school. So, next, we're going to go over like your TCM, your traditional Chinese medicine, which a lot of times, acupuncture is kind of clumped into there, even though they're 2 distinct practices. Your TCM is going to be more of your herbal medicine in Chinese, and then your acupuncture. I believe there's acupuncture really widespread in different parts of Asia, and so I don't know if there's nuance to it. I'm sure there are, but it operates off of the meridian system, and so the meridian system is your bioenergetic system. So you have, I think 12 basic meridians. I think that also too, they have more, but 12 basic ones, including your conception and governing. And then you have all of these points along that. And that's actually where, they insert the needles in to get the flow of chi and get that moving. Again, this medicine predates ours by over 10,000 years. And one of the things that I love about this particular practice is the value of emotions and emotional health and well-being. They really see that as a part of the care rather than separate, which unfortunately in conventional practice and in our Western culture, we've separated out the body, the mind, and the spirit. And we could talk a little bit about how and why that came about. Big shout out to the Catholic Church. So anyway, Chinese medicine or TCM and also acupuncture fall underneath that umbrella, right? And so then you have naturopathy. Again, we talked about this in the last episode, how naturopathy is really, stemming from Germany and all kinds of different, modalities within that. But also another modality that comes out of Germany is homeopathy, which naturopathy and homeopathy are actually separate. Not every naturopath is a homeopath. And in fact, there are some naturopaths who look down on homeopaths, right? So, everybody's going to kick the can, right? And so homeopathy, again, that low frequency medicine, you're, Samuel Hahnemann, Constantine Herring, you're taking an original substance through a process of succession and dilution. You're no longer giving that particular substance, you're giving just the frequency behind that substance. And people in the conventional medical community jump up and down and they're like, this is hogwash, because it can't be really tested in a conventional, like peer-reviewed sort of manner, because it's dealing with energy. It's not dealing with necessarily the biochemistry of the person. You're dealing solely with the bioenergetic frequency of the patient. And so it's very difficult to objectively measure bioenergetic frequency because it's more of an intuitive practice. And so, but those people who, such as myself, who have really attuned themselves and refined themselves to this practice, there's a lot of movement that happens with patients using this as a tool. And in homeopathy, we treat based off of the, psychological symptoms, the general symptoms, the peculiar symptoms. That's our working order. So a lot of times you're not treating off of, let's say, a physical symptom. So you see these like boron, blue bottles for homeopaths that people go in, I have allergies. Let me look it up. That's actually not really how homeopathy works. That's more of a complex practice where you're kind of taking a diagnose and manage model. We don't do that as much. I do more complex homeopathy, but it's much more blended and much more sophisticated. But in the classical sense, you do that kind of case taking, you whittle it down and give that person that one homeopathic remedy, and boom, it's amazing. And it addresses all things. It brings vital force, life energy, flowing, and the patient gets well. There's another subsect of homeopathy that I want to touch on, which is homeoprophylaxis. It is a way to educate the immune system that doesn't have a lot of the synthetics, that doesn't have any synthetics actually. Still widely controversial. It is not to replace any sort of vaccination or anything like that. It's simply to educate the immune system. And I've seen just some amazing things. Like I had a patient who, wanted to go to Africa and climb Mount Kilimanjaro and needed to make sure that her system was protected against malaria, and I gave her that homeoprophylaxis, and she did not get sick out of her entire crew, and everybody else had received conventional practice, and unfortunately they got sick. She did not. And so it really educates, because that bioenergetic frequency, but still largely controversial, especially in the West. All right, so now we go into naturopathy, which is nature cure. And so naturopathy is really about healing the body naturally, like that, the fundamental way. And it's also about empowering the patient, teaching them how to be their own doctor, teaching them what they need to do, teaching them about prevention, not waiting. So a lot of times in conventional practice, people will wait, or they're going to the conventional doctors who are trained merely to diagnose and manage disease. So if I'm a hammer, I'm always going to look for nails. I'm not going to see the screws. I'm not going to see the bolts. I'm not going to see maybe the things that are contributing to the problem. So a patient can come in and they'll go to their conventional doctor and they're feeling unwell, and everybody knows their body better than anybody else on the planet. And so they're feeling unwell, they're not feeling balanced. They go to the conventional doctor runs their labs and they say, oh, everything looks fine and everything looks normal, and eventually they'll start to refer to psych because they go, wait a second, this must be in your head. Really what they're telling you is you're just not sick enough yet. Come back when you're sicker. Come back when you have something that I can diagnose. And diagnosis is nothing more than an educated or sophisticated labeling system. And a lot of times people struggle with that diagnosis because we're pre-programmed. Like, if I have a label of what's wrong with me, then I'm gonna feel better, right? When in all actuality, there's never one causative. There's always, a lot of times it's, okay, the mental health of the patient went, the emotional health of the patient went, then they started, having these bad habits, then they started eating junk, then, their body started getting sluggish, their metabolism started breaking down, and the list goes, they started getting toxicity in the body, just a list of myriad of things, which that whole process is lumped together and says, okay, you have XYZ pathology or XYZ condition. So this is what you're diagnosed with. This is the only thing I'm going to see. And that's why in conventional practice, they have a lot of specialists, because everybody kind of has their little area of the world. Whereas in naturopathy, we look at the body as a whole. That was one of my other ones. So last time I was trying to remember the 6. So the body as a whole. I told you, we like embody these things. It's like just a thing, right? And so we look at the whole person, right? Different from holistic medicine, which I will talk about in a minute. So we treat the body as a whole. So we look at the relationship that one thing has to another, right? So that's also why we're not as reactive as your conventional practice, because let's say I put a patient on a supplement. For their liver. Like, let's say a patient comes in, they want a liver detox. In fact, I had a patient that did this early on in my practice. And she came in and she wanted to detoxify her liver. Well, I was like, oh, yeah, I didn't run any labs. I was just like, okay, yeah, sure, fine. I was so new, so green. And she came back to me and she's like, oh my God, I feel horrible. And she was having kind of this healing crisis, which in a lot of ways people think is normal. It's actually not. It's your body telling you that you're not in balance, you're not well enough to detox. So just FYI on that. This is also why we need standardization in our education. So the patient comes in and she's like, I'm not feeling well. I go, okay. So I ran labs on her. I looked, and sure enough, she was mineral depleted. Her adrenal glands, she was a realtor, her adrenal glands were fried. She didn't eat enough protein. So she wasn't really a candidate to detoxify. So once I stabilized those things, then she was able to pursue her detox with no problems. So you are going to hit certain walls with people when they're working, which can be frustrating, but it's very much peeling back an onion layer, and the body, hides itself, and meaning like it'll store things deeper and deeper into the tissue. And that's a homeopathic principle as well that we learn in Herring's law of cure, that, diseases kind of get pushed deeper and deeper and deeper into the cell wall. And as the body is healing itself, it pushes these things out. That's why a lot of people will have skin reactions and things like that in their healing process, because it's going from the inside out and pushing it from the cells into, out of the body. So, naturopathy, it looks at natural things, it looks at prevention, it looks at doctor as teacher, and it's really based off of a strong public health education stance. And yes, there is supplementation and things like that included, but primarily it's really the essence of living a natural life. Part of what falls under that umbrella is the use of supplements. So there's whole food supplements, which are made strictly from whole foods. So they are supplements that they'll take, let's say they take a whole bunch of, tomatoes, and they want to synthesize it down to get lycopene. That would be a whole food based supplement. A lot of people are drawn to that because they think, oh, this is better or whatever. And in some respect it is, but in a lot of respect, because it's food, right? It's imperfect. It's very difficult to dose to be able to move the biochemical markers in different directions. And when I mean biochemical markers, I mean your labs. It's difficult to move those in different directions. And so I tend to use nutraceuticals, which are pharmaceutical grade supplements. Now, they're not pharmaceuticals, they're pharmaceutical grade, meaning that they go through all of those standards that the pharmaceutical industry would go through, meaning the raw materials are heavily tested and scrutinized to make sure that there's no chemicals in them. They're compounded, to make sure that, they are accurately dosed so that what's on the bottle is in the bottle. And so there's all these good manufacturing practices that they utilize to make sure that they give them to providers like me, and we're able to put the patient on it and affect change in the lab work. So nutraceuticals is another modality that we use within naturopathy. Again, I've talked about homeopathy. Some providers do it, some providers don't. And then another modality that we utilize a lot in naturopathy is herbal medicine. I've talked about this a little bit in the last episode. Herbal medicine, again, it's medicine, right? It should not be taken lightly. It shouldn't be really taken on a daily basis. You can make yourself sick by taking too much. You can strip the body out of minerals. There's a lot of things that you can do that are actually harmful with herbs. So making sure that your body is well enough to handle the medicine and making sure that you time it effectively is really important. We do a lot of kind of coaching, counseling, communication with our patients, and that's really to help them to prioritize their care. Part of in my practice is education, coaching, and accountability. So I do coach, although I'm not a coach, if that makes sense. I am a doctor. And so, there are a lot of health coaches out there in healthcare. And while I respect health coaches, it's a different training. In fact, we have a holistic health coaching program. And my program, specifically, I wanted to teach subjective and objective analysis, meaning I wanted to teach people how to properly take a case, how to use different objective analysis to be able to determine what to do. So there is a therapeutic structure, there is a scientific order to it, which is very different than a lot of the coaching programs that I've seen out there, which primarily are about diets or, recommending random supplements without any kind of scientific process. So there is a scope of practice, which your scope of practice is what you're allowed to do. So for instance, as a naturopath, part of being a naturopath is not prescribing medication. Now, again, we have that NMDs, not to villainize them, but in certain states they do have prescribing rights, which is not part of our original practice. It's actually a part of more of a conventional practice because they're trained more in, pharmacology. They're trained more in how to, recommend those particular prescriptions. We do get one pharmacology class, but it's not enough to be able to make those recommendations. It's enough to know how they integrate with naturally occurring substances, because they do. If let's say you have a patient on statin medication and they come to you and they want to get off of it, and without that education you go, okay, now I'm going to put you on red yeast rice. Well, now that cholesterol is going to bottom out in that patient, because part of what a statin does is lower cholesterol, and so does red yeast rice. It also lowers the cholesterol as well. I want to touch on this because it's important. There was a study done most recently looking at various different natural things in comparison to statin drugs and lowering cholesterol. And of course, at the end of the study, they proved, statin wins, right? So not every study is kind of fairly created. Surprise, right? Instead, what they did was, Consumer Labs, which if you're not familiar with Consumer Labs, they are an independent research lab, and they look at third-party research lab, and they look at supplements for efficacy. So they take retail supplements and they test them to see in the lab, and companies can elect to have this done or not or whatever. And so they test to say, okay, which of these particular supplements are what they say they are, because it doesn't have the same standards. Retail doesn't have the same standards as a nutraceutical company, so they don't have the same qualifications. Anybody can pretty much sell a supplement. They can throw something in a bottle, put it on a shelf, and say, here you go. It's not regulated. And so they did a study, and Consumer Labs advised them that there was multiple, supplements that, could be used, and then multiple supplements that were lower quality. Well, in this particular study, what do you think they chose? You guessed the lower quality ones, you're right. So they chose the lower quality supplements, the ones that tested horrible, even in Consumer Labs' perspective, and they tested those against the statins. So of course the statins won. I'd love to see a restudy on actual nutraceuticals or supplements that have greater efficacy. That would be a good study. So if you guys, if you know anybody out there, let me know. Yeah, I think it's really important to know too that, we use supplements, and we also have an understanding of pharmacology, but it's not part of our scope of practice to make those recommendations, which is why we refer. So we'll touch a little bit on integrative medicine, because integrative medicine is different than naturopathy or any of the other practices. Integrative medicine, you're taught how to integrate the two. So how to work alongside, let's say, your cardiologist, or work alongside your oncologist, or work alongside the endocrinologist, or work alongside your conventional provider, so that you're not doing anything that's going to conflict with conventional practice. But also too, when you see a case, because oftentimes we see cases before conventional, because people don't always trust their conventional doctors. So they'll come to us, I call it looking for a Hail Mary. They'll come to us and say, hey, I have stage 4 pancreatic cancer, let's say, for instance, I'd like to do this completely natural. And we do have those, right? But it's our responsibility to look at that case and say, okay, here are the pros and the cons, here's the benefit versus the risk, but also too, I want you to be seen under an oncologist, and we're going to incorporate that, even if you choose, because it's always informed consent. Everybody should be able to be informed of risk versus benefit, and then choose what works best for them medically, culturally, philosophically, whatever. I'm a big believer in, having that informed consent, and really having medical autonomy. And so, they'll come to us and they'll want that. We have to be able to evaluate in integrative medicine what we can do and what we can't do, and understand which providers need to be included into a healthcare team, and how to work with that healthcare team effectively, and how to communicate it around in the healthcare community. So that's integrative medicine. Functional medicine, really, I feel like, is more of a modern day naturopathy, to be honest with you. It incorporates the laboratory diagnostic side. A lot of conventional providers kind of jump into it, and it does have basis of your nutrition and things like that, but it is more heavy laboratory and supplement, not kind of devoid of any of the spiritual or mental health practices or any of those things. It's really just, we're going to, they're open to it, don't get me wrong, but in functional medicine, we're trained really to, assess a patient, run a lab, treat the lab, in essence. I mean, they teach us to treat the patient, but in a lot of the practices, we're in essence treating the labs. And so functional medicine, while it's very effective, it definitely has its limitations to it, where it doesn't have that mental, that emotional piece, which brings us into holistic medicine. So holistic medicine incorporates that. It incorporates the mind, it incorporates the spirit, it incorporates things that are not necessarily seen. And me, having a background as a Native American, I really resonated with that practice, because there are certain things that, from a folklore perspective, may not necessarily be scientifically proven, but we know that they exist, and we know, and they have a place. And we don't want to ostracize that, or to, make it seem like, that just doesn't exist. Denial is not necessarily going to work. Holistic practice, there's a lot more nuance to it. You're reading more energy with the patient, and you're evaluating from multiple perspectives, which I love about it. It adds so much complexity and richness to, I think, the equation. And then lastly, one of the things that I definitely am launching in my school, we have, I believe, a master's and a doctorate level program in this, is indigenous and spiritual medicine, because there's this resurgence of plant medicines coming on. There is this desire to be more connected with the world. I mean, look, I live in St. Lucia, for crying out loud. My husband has indigenous roots. I have indigenous roots, and we love to be more connected to nature and more connected to the land, and that is because it's coming from literally our DNA. And so a lot of Black and brown people, our indigenous heritage was literally wiped out with genocide, with slavery, with all kinds of things. Not to say that our European counterparts haven't had this experience too, but it's very distinct within our cultures that we have very limited access to those aspects of our heritage. And so really wanting to bring that back into life and, teach people about that and all of those things is just just like more like that one. I feel like it's just for me. So those are all of the different modalities. Trying to think if there's anything else, that and obviously, if you have any questions, feel free, to drop them in the comments below or send them in and I'll answer them kind of as these, shows kind of continue. Yeah. So again, we look at our modalities as like a tool bag, and not everybody is trained in everything. Like for instance, in conventional practice, like there are certain people who decide that they want to go into surgery and they want to be trained in surgery, where some are like, no, I'm going to do radiology, right? Or I want to do, PT or whatever. Not everybody has to, specialize in anything. For me, originally, I wanted to be more in like autoimmunity, oncology, and that was coming from my functional medicine training. However, I realized just the emotional toll on me was going to be greater, which is why I chose more family practice. Now, a lot of times we're general practitioners in naturopathy, like we're trained generally speaking to help people, but you can choose a patient population that you really love and you really want to work with. I tend to work with 5 different patient populations. I work with families wanting to transition from conventional practice over to more of a holistic practice, and I teach them how to incorporate that in their families. I work with high-level professionals that really want to optimize and balance and really take their lives, their careers, their life, their families like to the next level. And then people with mental health that struggle, either that want to treat integratively or completely holistically. And those people with chronic disease, again, that want to either treat integratively or completely holistically. And then lastly, people with metabolic conditions, people that want to lose weight, gain weight, or people that are athletes. And so those are the patient populations that I focus on in my practice. But really, I mean, you can choose just about any patient population that you want to focus on. I know with my holistic health coaches, a lot of times they will choose patient populations that they have had experience with, and so that gives them a sense of comfort and security and a feeling of wisdom because they know. For me, I really just wanted, I didn't want to be pigeonholed. I wanted to learn as much as I could, which is why I went into general family, so I could see everybody. I could see the diabetics and the hypertensive cases and the weight loss cases and the babies and the autoimmunity, and I could just get a splattering of everybody. And so over the course of time, I've developed a lot of experience in a lot of different areas and a lot of different types of cases, which I'm super excited to teach and train people in. So I think that covers most of our modalities and what we have to offer in naturopathy. I think in our next class, we're really going to talk a little bit more about the sciences, a little bit more about how we apply the information, because all of the modalities are great. But I think that, like I said in the beginning, they're the sexy part. That's what people gravitate towards. But honestly, what I see oftentimes is they'll take a certificate course in, let's say, herbology, or they'll take a certificate course in homeopathy, and then they'll hang their shingle out as an herbalist or homeopath, and they don't have the scientific backing basis behind it. And if they don't have that, they can really cause harm. And so that is one of the things that, that's the last one. We first want to do no harm. So I knew I was going to get it. So again, I embody these things. I don't just remember them. So the six things, let's see if I get them all at once, right? So first, do no harm, treat the person as a whole, prevention is better than cure, doctor is teacher. Let's see, it just goes. So anyway, I'll post the 6. And so the 6 principles of naturopathy, I'm sure I'm going to remember them again in the next session. So Yeah, we don't want to leave out the sciences, because the sciences are really what protects us, meaning protects me as the provider and protects the patient, because we can say, oh, okay, I looked at this sort of diagnostic. This diagnostic told me this. I listened to this patient. I had this hypothesis or a guess, and then I confirmed that, or disproved it using my objective analysis, and then I created a treatment plan. So there has to be a structure. If there's no structure to your care, you're really, you might as well just go work at like Vitamin Shop or something like that, which nothing against that type of practice, but that's more of a retail model where a person is DIYing it. They're going to come in and they say, hey, what do you have for this? But a lot of times it's like throwing paint up against a wall to see what sticks. You don't know what's effective. You don't know if it's going to work. So usually the DIYers spend a lot more time, a lot more money, a lot more energy because they're DIYing it. It's like, I could YouTube how to build a house. And maybe one of my toxic traits is thinking I can. However, in reality, I don't have the skills. I'm not a contractor. I'm not a carpenter. I'll leave that to them. So thank you so much for listening in. Again, this is episode 2 of Nature Cure. It's going to be found on the YouTube as well as all of the other podcast channels. And tune in. We drop our episodes every Monday. And so like, share, and subscribe for more.